Hello, everyone, and welcome. I know people are still coming in, but I wanted to take a moment while they're doing that to introduce myself. To those of you who don't know me, I'm Nina Sadowsky, the program director of NYU Los Angeles. And I wanted to share our land acknowledgement with you. We are not in the academic space, but we think we are happily returning there in the fall as we come out of this terrible period we've all been living through. So we just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which our academic center sits before we begin to dish on Hollywood. It is my real pleasure tonight to introduce Ted Sullivan. Ted and I are very dear friends, and he's perhaps my most inappropriate friend, which is maybe why we are dear friends. So I anticipate that we will have a lively conversation. And I want to thank you very much, Ted, for joining us. I want to also say, you can please drop questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I will be monitoring them. We also had some questions submitted in advance. So we will try to get to those as well. So, okay, so Ted, this conversation is about the culture of the writer's room. So I think it would be interesting for you to begin and just talk about your very interesting path to where you began and where your career trajectory has taken you. And I don't want you to leave out the failures and the back steps, because that's where we all learn the most. So I'm going to turn it over to you now and go.
Okay, and I have to start off by saying this is not how I normally look. This is COVID hair. I do not normally look like a groovy dad from 1978. So just want to get that out in the open. I did take a unusual path to get here. I also didn't come to primetime TV until much later. I was 38. I did a wide variety of lives before that, weird chapters. I used to think that was a detriment, but now I think it's kind of a plus for making me a more interesting writer and a more effective producer. And I try to tell that to people, especially if they're coming to it later in life. All those things it's not wasted time. It's time learning how to be a better, more effective worker in person. I started in a very normal path. I went to USC Film in their undergrad program, their writing program. It is not the program that apparently it is today. I understand it's much better. We had a lot of professors who hadn't done anything other than write books about writing, like how to write a screenplay in 30 days, which, yeah, you can, but should you? Yeah, and is it any good? I will say we had a couple of amazing professors too. Nelson Gidding, Abe Polonsky. They were writers from the Blacklist era. They stood up against the government. Abe went to prison for it. I was very grateful to be their TAs and have them be professors. So that was great. But after graduating, I couldn't get a job, so I went to New York. I became to be a teacher. And when I was there, I started watching soap operas kind of as a lark. But then I thought, well, they make those here. Maybe I should try to do that. And I got a job writing soap operas. And soaps are incredible training. Everyone in the business looks down on them, but I consider them my grindhouse Roger Corman period. We had 5 writers. We would write 5 to 6 episodes a week. We wrote 50 weeks out of the year. Sometimes you'd have to write 2 episodes a week. When I finished my first year on As World Turns, I'd written 56 episodes of television. So that teaches you how to break a story on the board, write your episode, get network notes, implement those notes for production, and do it really quickly, and then move on and do it again. And those are skills every TV writer needs to know how to do. So I am now extremely grateful for that period. But after 4 years and after 9/11, I left New York and TV writing behind. I felt burned out and kind of empty. So I embarked on one of my many other lives, like everything from living in a warehouse downtown LA and throwing illegal raves, and working up in San Francisco as a research assistant on longitudinal studies for HIV, Parkinson's disease, alcoholism, Alzheimer's. And then after 4 more years, I decided to try my hand in the entertainment industry again, only this time in prime time. And I wanted to come back with a better understanding of every aspect of the business, because working in science taught me the importance of specificity and protocols. And I started with the one thing that I could do on my own, which was writing. I rented a bunch of shows from Blockbuster, which also tells you how long ago this was. And I studied primetime story construction. I'd sit with a notepad and look at what shows did right. And just like you said, just as importantly, what they did wrong. And then I'd write a sample of that show. And each script taught me something. I ended up only using one, the house one that I wrote. But the ones that I didn't use, in a lot of ways, taught me more, because I think you learn more from failure than you do from success, because you go like, oh, that didn't work, and I can see why it didn't work, which is very, very useful. It's not a waste of time. It's a way to learn how to be a more effective writer. And at the same time, I was doing any job I could: grip, electrical, camera, wardrobe, sound, which is kind of around the time you and I met. And again, that was invaluable because I understood how a set functioned. It made me a better producer now. I knew how long different things should take. I also got treated very badly by directors and producers and writers, which is something I try to remember today when I produce TV, because everyone is important and each department deserves respect. And when you shit on them, you not only make your product worse, you make their lives worse, and that's unacceptable.
I think that's a cycle. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. You know this. I believe in love leadership. I believe that if you lead with a sense of we're a team, I will support you, I will enable you to do your best job, as opposed to I will oppress and terrorize you. I think you just get better product. You get, a happier, yes, more creative group of people.
100%. But I was making no headway on getting into the writing of it all, which is what I wanted. So I built my own editing system from scratch, and I taught myself how to edit, because I just was trying to learn more and more. And I got really good at that. And I was editing movie trailers, and I got hired by ABC Promo to cut their spots. And I was on staff, and I was making a really good living. And weirdly, that made me a much better writer for 2 reasons. One, editing is basically writing with pictures. So you spend a lot of time looking at a scene, deciding what you need and what you don't. Because when you write, you overwrite. And the editing process lets you carve down a fat scene to just the core. And doing that as an editor made me a much better writer later. It forced me to ask questions like, is this beat really important, or am I just holding on to it out of ego? And the more you can do that, the more specific your writing becomes, and the more you can do that on the page, the better, because it's cheaper not to shoot stuff you're not going to end up putting in the final cut. So those years as an editor honed my writing skills in ways that I didn't even realize at the time. And so even though I was frustrated I wasn't getting a writing job, it was making me a better writer. And that's another thing I try to relay to people, like, you're learning skills even when you don't know you're learning the skill. And secondly, and this is a weird part of this town, the fact that I was employed and making a good living made me less stressed when I went to interviews for writing jobs. Because this town smells desperation, and they hate desperation. They hate it. And when you give off that sense of, oh, please, God, I need this job, they won't hire you. They'll spit in your face. They hate you. But if you go in with this attitude of like, I'm not sure your job is better than what I have right now, they're like, what? No, here, take it, please, whatever. No.
You have cracked the psychology of Hollywood right there.
Exactly.
Cleaned it up.
But that took a couple of years of interviews and meeting at networks. But finally, I got into the Law and Order camp, and that was my big break. It happened super fast. The showrunner heard a pitch, liked it, and suddenly I was hired on the spot. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm a TV writer again. And I'm now currently co-executive producer of Riverdale, and sold my first show, a miniseries about the Wright brothers. Leonardo DiCaprio's producing. It's going to be for Nat Geo and Disney Plus. And this is my first chance to be an EP on a show I helped create. Usually I'm a gun for hire. I'm a number two to help showrunners keep the trains running on time. And that's pretty much the previously on Ted Sullivan.
Yeah, very exciting about the Wright brothers project.
Yeah, that is exciting.
So what is your what's the most satisfying job you've had to date? It could be writing or otherwise, and why? Just in your entertainment career.
That is a really good question. Okay, I think my answer are my first job and my current one, and that's for very, very different reasons.
All right, expound upon that, please.
Yes, ma'am. Law and Order: Criminal Intent was an incredible first job. Waylon Green was the showrunner, and he's the most amazing boss and mentor and friend I've ever had, other than you, obviously. I mean, I spend holidays with him. He's kind of like a surrogate father to me. He has been my greatest champion. He's what you dream of when you get your first job. And it's what I try to do with other junior writers. Like, he pushes you very hard. He also pushes the story in every way, the break, the character, theme. He gut checks every choice characters make. But he also involves you in the process. Even as a staff writer, just starting out, he makes you feel part of producing the episode. And that's invaluable. Like, because when you're starting out, you don't know what you don't know. And Waylon is this kind-hearted teacher. He never makes you feel stupid, but he constantly shares advice that will stay with you for your whole career. And he has an incredible career. Like, he wrote The Wild Bunch and War Games, and he was on the first seasons of Hill Street Blues and NYPD Blue and ER and all the Law and Order. So he just has so much wisdom to share with you. Mm-hmm. But he also creates a safe environment to make mistakes. And that's key to an effective writer's room. Because you have to be comfortable suggesting things that are wrong. Because that's how you learn how to suggest things that are right. It's what we were saying before. Failure breeds success.
Right. It's not even necessarily failure. It's sometimes you have to go down this path to say, oh, well, that's the wrong path, but that'll push you over here, right?
Exactly.
It's not necessarily, I mean, there are big failures. You and I have both had them, so I'm not discounting those. But I think there's also a difference between a failure and just what is process, which is that, telling story, as much as we can study structure and study what the greats did and work as hard as we can on doing our own best, when you're down the rabbit hole, you're down the rabbit hole. And, it's hard to do well, this is. So.
And it's what you said earlier. It's not a straight line. Writing a story, creating a story is not a straight line, and it shouldn't be. I remember when for one of the episodes I wrote, Waylon was at the whiteboard and he started changing things around, and he saw I made a face, and he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Well, the story is changing a lot." And he said, "I hope so. Otherwise, it's a really boring story if the first way you break it is the only way it can be told." And that lesson really stuck with me, because it freed up my mind to make better choices other than my first choice. And it trained me not to be so precious and to listen to other people's ideas and push the story in a different way, which frankly is the opposite experience I've had with showrunners in toxic rooms. Because I've worked with showrunners who put their first idea on the board on the first day of a break, and that's it. You're stuck with that scene, whether it's right for the story or not, and they won't let you change it.
let's talk about toxicity in the writers' room, because this is, something that you and I've talked about a lot, and it's sort of, was sort of where we wanted to move the conversation a little bit, without naming names, right? I don't want you to get into trouble. But besides
don't you want me to get in trouble though? Isn't that why?
I kind of do. I kind of do. So if you happen to name names, I will happily hear them. But no, I'm interested in protecting your life and future, Ted. But but let's talk about that, because I think like there's that kind of toxicity of the rigidity of ideas, right? And not willing to listen. But what other kinds of toxicity have you seen in the writers' room, and how does that impact the work and the experience? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. All you have to do is look at my IMDb page to know that I have been in some infamous rooms. I'm not talking out of school. It's been front page news. So unfortunately for me, that has kind of been more the norm than the outlier. My friends think that I've been unlucky, but I don't think they're seeing the forest for the trees, because I think there's a psychology that goes along with hazing cultures where their abused don't realize how badly they've been abused. Because when I say to other writers, point out toxic behavior to them, they go, "Oh yeah, well that's just a writer's room." And my position is abuse is not an artistic process. So how does it affect the process? Well, I mean, bad jobs are all the same and are all bad in the same way. If you don't feel safe, you don't do your best work. It's emotionally draining to be in a room where you're constantly walking on eggshells. It's like having a parent where you never know what is going to get you a beating. It's humiliating, it's traumatic, it affects your health, your sleep, your relationships. You start to distrust everyone around you. It's like being a character in Darkness at Noon. You feel trapped in an emotional gulag where everyone could betray you just to save their own necks. Look, I work very hard on shows. I bleed for shows, but no show, not even my favorites like Breaking Bad or The Wire, are worth making people miserable over. No one should get hurt making a TV show, either physically or emotionally, but it happens all the time. And in the end, what it does is it fosters fear. Fear is not conducive to the creative process. Your brain shuts down. Adrenaline kicks in. You make unforced errors. It's harder to do what I said earlier, which is to hear other people's ideas or recognize that their ideas may be good, or the answer that you've been banging your head against the whiteboard looking for, because you're more focused on what won't get you in trouble instead of what will make the episode better. Frankly, go ahead.
No, sorry. I wanted to circle back because you said that there were two, your favorite jobs were the first one, working for,
sure.
And then I realized we moved on to the toxicity before we got to your current favorite job. So I wanted to talk about that too. I didn't want to, disrespect. So
absolutely. Look, the other great job that I have is the one I have right now, which is Riverdale. I was a fan of our showrunner, Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa, before I ever met him. He'd written some of my favorite Archie comics that I read as adults, not as kids. And then we met on Supergirl and we became friends. And then he poached me to join Riverdale. And it's much later in my career. I have a lot more responsibility, and this experience has been terrific in that regard, because despite Roberto being a very hands-on showrunner, he both encourages and expects writers to take ownership of their episode, to have pride in the show, and to present and push the directors and the cast and everyone to make the best, most entertaining episode of TV. And this is one thing that I really, really want to point out, and this is what makes him a great showrunner, is he's very protective of the writers on his staff.
Mm.
On set, our word matters. In prep, our opinions count. We're heard and protected. If he hears that there's shit going on, he steps in and he goes, "That's not acceptable," and that is not always the case. So I'm really grateful for that. And look, like Waylon, he is able to look at a story and go, "Oh, I pitched that idea, but that is wrong for the final version of this story." And the more you can do that as a writer, the more you can do that as a showrunner, and accept that your first idea may simply have been the thing that helped inspire the story, but doesn't belong in the story.
Right.
It doesn't mean it was a bad idea. It got you here.
Idea that got you somewhere else.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. Yeah. So that I'm very grateful. I right now it's been bookends. It's been, my first job was incredible, and my latest job has been incredible.
Do you think that the culture of rooms is changing generally because of, like, hashtag Me Too and this sort of general hard look that the industry has been taking on toxicity and abusive behavior? The shaming that got rooted, the fall of Harvey Weinstein, the many showrunners who have been called out. I don't want to name them here.
Yeah.
Although I will say, just with a group of women staff writers, and someone asked who here has had someone take out their member in a meeting, and every single woman's hand went up, which was every single woman who had staffed, which was astonishing to me. But do you think it's getting better, or do you think it's the business as usual?
Look, I think Me Too has helped a little, but not as much as you'd hope. I have a lot of thoughts on this. So look, writers' rooms are basically the last bastions of fiefdoms, right? The showrunner is the monarch. We're all their serfs. Sometimes you have a benevolent leader. Other times you have Ivan the Terrible, right? But I will be honest, Me Too is only part of the battle. There's been a lot of attention paid to toxic male behavior, and that's because there are way more men in power due to systemic sexism, absolutely. But some of my worst bosses and worst execs have been toxic women. Power corrupts, and in a fiefdom, you have absolute power, and we all know what that does. So it's not just a hashtag Me Too thing, it's a hashtag don't be an asshole thing. Like, that's really what it is, because anyone can be an asshole.
Yeah, that's been my operating modality for my entire career. That's what I say. It's just been, don't be an asshole. Try to do business without being an asshole. So what do you think people can do, who are, not the showrunner or not the co-EP? What do people can do, like, if they're starting out in the room and fearful and trying to get ahead? What can you do from that perspective to just help the culture be better?
Yeah, I mean, look, before I do have some thoughts on this, but I do want to say one thing. I think it's unfair that the burden to make the work environment better is on us, the writers who work for the abusers, because it's a huge risk to speak out. I've done it and paid a price. I've seen others do it and pay a similar price. It sucks. It's terrifying and lonely. And in many cases, you may make the situation a little better, but most of the time, the abusive people survive. For all the Harvey Weinsteins and Kevin Spaceys and Les Moonveses who are driven out of the industry, most just get moved to a new show, like abusive priests who get shuffled off to a different church. And the worst part is they're more powerful than you are. So you've taken a shot at the king, you've only winged them, and now you have to work in the same industry as them. What really needs to happen, and I will answer your question, but what really needs to happen is a reckoning on the studio side and the network side. If they really wanted to lead and not just react, they would clean house. They would root out every executive who has been protecting these abusers and get rid of them. They would have a zero tolerance on their side, always, not just when the New York Times is calling.
Right.
Because every time they get rid of a bad player, they always say the same thing. That behavior is not tolerated. He doesn't represent the studio. That's not who we are. But all the people who enabled him and protected him are still working there.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. Let's anarchy. Let's settle You know, I mean, I'm hoping actually, and you know, and I'm kidding when I say burn it all down, but I am hoping that coming out of the past 15 months is causing kind of a reckoning, not just about toxic behavior, but about everything. You know, like how we're choosing to spend our time, what kind of work we're wanting to do, who we're willing to work for and with. I think a lot of people are really having, you know, serious questioning about that, and maybe that'll help lead to a more systemic reconfiguration.
Change. Yeah,
I know I'm an optimist, so.
Yeah, I mean, in answer to your earlier question, what I would say is the same thing I would say if you see something happening on the street. When you see abuse, you need to speak out, because silence is complicity. If you're in a position of power, like once you get to higher levels, you need to step in. You need to be willing to put your beliefs on the line and do what's right. Doing the right thing is rarely the easy thing, but only if we consistently do that will we have any lasting change. And we should not work for known toxic showrunners. That means refusing jobs even on hot or successful shows. Again, that's hard, but if networks can't hire good staff, the industry will start to take notice. And we should help junior writers.
That's an economic lever, and there aren't any, right? But that's very
right.
smart. Yeah.
We should help junior writers avoid toxic rooms through databases or mentorships and even social media. And by the way, I hope you'll notice I called them junior writers instead of baby writers, which is a demeaning term used in rooms, and it subconsciously justifies treating them badly.
Wow,
and that needs to stop. We should stop calling them baby writers. They're junior writers and they're senior writers. Those are ranks. They're not derogatory terms. And the other thing that we have, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Ted.
The last thing I would say that we have to do is we have to strengthen our union. We need to stand with the WGA. We need to vote. We need board members who will fight for better conditions. We need to go to meetings so that they know what to fight for. Too many writers don't even go to meetings in our own union. That's shameful. Unions are important. They're why children don't work anymore, or why there's a supposed 40-hour work week and healthcare and pensions and weekends. But we got complacent. We got used to all the good things that unions gave us, things that they fought for and back in the day died for. Go watch the movie Matewan. It's one of my favorite movies, and it will show you how bad life can be without unions. And I think we need to empower our own union in this rapidly changing industry so that we have a voice against the mega corporations that control it. And frankly, the union needs to police their own members, and they need to punish the ones who abuse writers.
There has to be consequences.
Absolutely.
There have to be a younger writer should staff for people that are abusive. The studios need to have a zero tolerance policy. The network needs to support. When I started to the union needs to support. When I interrupted before, it was because I was thinking about the nomenclature of baby writers, and I was thinking about, I've often commented that there's so much other language in the writer's room, like gangbang a script.
I hate that term. Yeah.
Like all the terminology that's, kill your babies, right? It's also dark and savage, right? And so I've been really trying to reinvent language for that, because I feel like that also contributes to a toxic kind of culture, just evoking that. I mean, unless you're working on a thriller, then it's okay.
But even then, like you want to, even if you're doing a horror film or something like Criminal Minds, it doesn't give you permission to make the room toxic or to make or to use terminology that is triggering. I mean, gang banging a script that's a fucking terrible term.
It's so gross. Yeah, it's
gross. Terrible. It's not like some great female writer came up with that term. Some jackass dude. you know,
So let's
just
talk about
someone horrible.
yeah, it's just terrible. So I think that, like you said, like if you're even conscious of saying, I'm not going to say baby writer anymore, right? I'm going to say junior writer. I'm not going to use gangbanger script. I'm not going to say, kill my babies, kill your babies, or kill your darlings. I'm going to use different terminology to talk about the development process. I think all of that is part and parcel of, creating a environment. But I want to segue over to the working during the pandemic a little bit, because you guys kept shooting Riverdale, right, all the way through, pretty much.
All the way. Yeah, I mean, we had an interruption. We cut short our season 4 by 3 episodes, but we moved those 3 episodes to the beginning of season 5. So instead of doing 22, we did 19, and then we had a shortened season because we started later for season 5. But yeah, I mean, in general, the upper levels almost didn't stop working the entire time.
So did you have an entirely virtual room? Is that how you worked?
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about, were there any, talk about the advantages or disadvantages of a virtual room? What's your perception on that?
Oh, that's interesting. Look, I'm actually of two minds on this. Of course, I miss being in a room with my friends, because Riverdale is a very special group of talented and kind people. I actually legitimately like them. And there's an energy. I hate everyone. I don't even like you. I'm waiting for you to come through and like give me my big break. No, there's an energy when you're all together that is Zoom room just does not capture. I also miss the moments when you're not in a room. I miss hanging out in someone's office and sparking up a conversation that somehow makes it into the show, or a story someone tells, or an article someone read. Like those moments, you just can't have those moments on Zoom. That said, because Zoom rooms are mentally exhausting, I found we were highly focused. So our days were much shorter and we got more done. But that was probably due to the fact that we had no turnover from season 4 into season 5. So our Zoom room had worked together in person. That helped a lot. I can't imagine. I know people that started new rooms in a Zoom, and it's weird. Yeah. So I think there's a difference between an established show with a group of people that know each other and one that doesn't. We also have a very respectful room that doesn't talk over each other. And when multiple people do accidentally, because Zoom, we've done it constantly, although you do it even when there is no Zoom. Roberto, as a showrunner, and this is another reason why he is not a toxic showrunner, is terrific in saying, Janine, you go, then Aaron, then Chrissy, or he'll say, Ariana, I think you were going to say something. He's very aware of the people in the virtual room, and he wants to hear from everyone. So that, I think, is another one where it's a case-by-case study on, but there's, like, as with everything except Nazis, there's good and bad.
Okay. Do you think Zoom rooms will continue post-pandemic? Do you think?
I bet it's going to be kind of a mix, depending on the showrunner, but also the size of the order and the budget. Production save a ton of money in virtual rooms on like stuff that most writers don't think about: office space, furniture, parking, food, electricity, air conditioning, paper, and pens. Like, so much overhead is suddenly gone. So that's attracted them. If it's a short order, which is becoming the norm, I bet there's going to be a lot of pressure put on showrunners not to have a physical room. And as much as people hate that, there's one other upside to it, which is it opens the door to writers who aren't in LA. So the people who are talented but can't afford to live here or don't have the access to get here, suddenly they have an opportunity to write on a staff, because it doesn't matter where you are. Or if you're a junior level writer who got staff, but now you just don't have enough money to be here, go live in Idaho, or you can do that. And by the way, there were people when I did soap opera that did the same. They would just get files sent to them and they would write them. So it can work. And I'm actually kind of hopeful that maybe this could open the door to some talented writers who normally wouldn't get a chance.
I like that. You know, I'm optimistic, so I appreciate your
Mhm.
optimism.
Sure.
You've worked on some enormously popular shows and some shows that are like really culty. I mean, Star Trek, Revenge, Riverdale, and these are kind of culty shows. So as the writer, I mean, I know the actors have to interact with the fandom, but do you as a writer interact with the fandom, and do you feel an obligation, for example, on social media to interact with fans?
I want to be careful.
Oh,
Not as much. Right. It's just us talking, right? This is just us. Nothing to worry about. I don't do it as much anymore. The Riverdale fans are pretty intense, you know, young and hormonal. So I kind of backed away for the time being. But I will say I was a Twitter, Instagram, you know, junkie. I started experimenting with social media when I was doing Revenge. I didn't even know what Twitter was, but PR wanted us to start tweeting. So I decided to see what kind of responses worked and what didn't work. What really seemed to click were behind the scenes photos. I took the kind of pictures I used to love seeing when I was a kid, like reading about the making of Star Wars and Star Trek. I loved seeing the actor and the director and the camera all in the same shot. And turned out the Revenge fans felt the same, so they liked that. Same with Star Trek. Okay. Let me tell you two things I did at Star Trek because of the secrecy around making that show. And I think they're good examples of social media having a positive effect with the fans. There was a long time between the announcement of the show and the start of production. And when I came on, we were still writing the 2-part pilot, hadn't even been cast, but the fans were already super anti the show. They always are when there's a new Star Trek. I know, I used to be one of them. I hated Next Generation before it came out, and then it became one of my favorite shows. So I wanted to see if I could change the narrative. I used a doll of a classic Star Trek alien, a Gorn, that the writers had named Jason Gorn. And I started posting this will be very on brand for me. I started posting shots of Jason passed out in his hotel room with booze bottles all around him, or rewriting his lines in his trailer at a keyboard, or drunkenly wandering around Toronto. And like Jason, because I couldn't post anything about the show, and Jason took off. And the cast would go, "Oh, I need to take a picture with Jason." That made Jason even bigger. And fans made art of him and memes. And when people saw me at conventions, they didn't want a picture with me. They wanted a picture with Jason. It was a ton of fun. And that actually got us some really good, it kind of turned the corner a little bit with the potential audience. And then the other thing I did was I did pop-up Q&As. Star Trek fans could ask me anything about Star Trek, but not about the show, but I would answer about my favorite episodes or movies or who my favorite captain was. And that kind of stuff makes the fans feel heard and involved, and in a way, a part of the show, which helps the show. So I really enjoyed doing that. But as for an obligation, I don't feel an obligation anymore. I think it's useful and valuable. I will do it again when 14-year-old girls are not going to attack me because I helped break up Bughead or Varchi. So like that's, you know, I just can't deal with that shit. Like that is not useful.
We have a lot of questions from the audience. I want to get to some of them. We had a very basic question from someone, which is, what is a showrunner? So why don't you answer that question? Because then we had some other questions about that. But if you could give a quick definition for us.
Showrunner, like think of the showrunner as the president of the United States. Like if the president of the United States created the president of the United States. Now, usually, like showrunner tends to be the person who created the show, or they leave and someone else comes in, but they're the ones who control the creative direction, who guides the show. In the writer's room, they're the final word. In the edit bay, they're the final word. They're not God. That's the network. The network is God. Like, the network can force the showrunner to do something they don't want to do. But in general, like, they're the person who is the, for lack of, I'm not crazy about this term, but they're the auteur. They're of the show. They're the ones in charge of the creative, but also business production side of it. Handling the schedules and the budgets, just everything. They're the CEO of the company that it, because think about it, that's what a production is. A production is a show that has a $3 to $4 million budget. I mean, you end up running a company that has $60 to $100 million, budget and 300 employees. Like, that, you're a CEO of a company. That's why there's so many bad showrunners, because they're not prepared to do that job. Because the dirty little secret is they're just writers who got handed. They're just writers who got handed the keys to the kingdom, but they don't know what to do with it.
So a couple of other questions. Back when you were doing more tech and support as opposed to writing, someone wants to know, this is from Floyd Basinas, I think, if I'm pronouncing wrong, I'm sorry. Did you ever walk out on a job?
Yes. You mean like when I was an editor, or when I was working crew? There were definitely times when I showed up to a set, or I would do one day in a shoot and be like, oh, so lunch is a bag of Doritos. And there were jobs where they were like, oh yeah, we said we were going to pay you today at the end of the week. And I was like, I've been here too many times. I know you're going to get to the end of the week, get all of our work out of us. And so I would walk from that. I definitely quit some editing jobs. Part of the reason why I went to ABC was it was a corporate good editing job. Like, when you're doing movie trailers and they're like, hey man, listen, we don't have any money, but how about a gram of Coke? And you're like, no man, I actually can't pay my rent with that. So if you could give me cash. Yeah.
Here's another interesting question. Do you think that people need to stay in a lane? This comes from Pepper Reed, and Pepper's asking, says that they write best fantasy and supernatural script. And do you think people should define themselves in a lane? Obviously, you've worked primarily drama, sci-fi, soapy, right?
I mean, somewhat, but I've done cop shows like Brazilian Isles. I've done, I did a doctor show called Pure Genius. I mean, you could probably argue soapy is more, but everything is kind of soapy these days, Will they or won't they, all that kind of stuff.
I like that, actually,
Yeah. I think it helps early on. I don't really know anymore what the right thing to do at the beginning of a career. Like, I think what I do is I keep generating different types of stuff. So I have cop dramas, I have Westerns, I have World War I dramas. Because I think the best thing to do is to write things that show different sides of your personality and interests. So your script should help tell the story of you, about who you are. Because if you can have a spectrum, it opens you up to different types of shows that might be of interest to you, but people might not think you'd be right for. But if you have a sample to say, like, actually, I know how to do this, or this is another we're not all just one thing. I'm sure if someone likes I hate fantasy. I'd write it, but I don't particularly watch it. But I think the danger of sticking to one lane is, it closes a lot of doors for you. And I'm in the business of trying to kick doors open or pick the lock to get them open. And different types of scripts do that for you.
This is sort of a related question. Is there a meritocracy? Can people rise just through merit?
No.
No. So what do you think it takes to rise if there is no meritocracy?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of answers to that. I mean, one of the answers is you could be an asshole, but don't be that. I mean, the fastest way to get to the top is to be an asshole, to backstab people, to step on people, to be opportunistic. I've known a lot of people like that, and they're awful, and they succeed, and it's frustrating because they're flying around in jets and on the cover of magazines, and you're sometimes like worried that you're not going to make your mortgage that month, or your rent, or you pay your car. Like, those things are tough. I would rather be able to look at myself in the mirror. Am I where I totally want to be? No. Did I spend a lot of time thinking people were going to notice that I'm a hard worker and talented and all? They did, but they were like, great, keep doing that for this other person's show. That doesn't help you get ahead, like, I think the best thing you can do is keep seeking out good people, create a network of good people who champion you and you champion them, and you mean it and they mean it. And that it's not just a relationship like our relationship, which is just totally transactional.
Totally.
But that it's not
right.
But that I think you have to create your own network, and you have to try to get your own jobs. Most of the jobs that I got were through relationships that I've developed and friendships that I've developed, that when people were in a position, they were able to go, hey, you should really hire this guy because he'll deliver and he'll make your life easier. And I do the same thing all the time. Like, I'll call someone and say, this woman is fantastic. You need to hire her right now. And if you don't, I'm going to send her to someone else. And that's the best thing that you can do. It takes longer, but you'll end up not selling your soul along the way.
Here's a good related question. This is from Faith Pernick. Can you address ageism in the industry? And I think that, you and I both have different perspectives on this, because I sold my first script over 40 and you went back into the room at 38. So what would you, how would you say? We are anomalous, and I always say that, when I talk about my career, that I'm anomalous, that, but what do you think is the take? Do you think that people are recognizing that experience actually brings, texture and depth to writers' room?
It literally depends on the showrunner. Like, for instance, when I won't say who it is, but there was one agent who loved my writing, read my house script, read another script, hadn't met me. And then I was 37 at the time. And then we were supposed to have a meeting. I was going in to sign for him to represent me. And he went, "Oh, you're old." And I went, "Yeah, I guess." And he went, "Yeah, man." And he looked me in the eye and said, "Go home. No one's going to hire you."
Wow.
And that was like, I went to my car and I just bawled. Like Shonda Rhimes slide down the wall in the shower crying, like just the worst. And I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I will be honest, it worries me. It worries me more and more when I look around. I will say Waylon Green, when he hired me, I said, he's at that time, I think he was probably 75. And I said, one night I said, I was really grateful you hired me because like a lot of people wouldn't even meet with me because of my age. And he goes, oh, I only want to meet with people who are like 35 and over because they're interesting, they've lived something. So he's someone who does that. There are other showrunners that I've been with who, Roberto, I think, is someone who does that, even though Roberto has a wide spectrum of people, of walks of life, of how old they are, how young they are, trans, diverse room. Like it's a very, very great mix of melting pot of writers, but it really, really depends on the network, on the executives, on the showrunner. If you're lying to yourself if you don't think that it's a real issue. It's absolutely a real issue. But I have dark moments. There are moments where I'm gripped with fear, where I go like, how much more time do I have left to earn enough money before this town shows me the door?
Right. Well, it's partly why I moved over to books, right? I started writing books and then I started selling them back to TV. And I, partly wrote the first one because I felt, I'd come out of, I'd written a script that was about high school students and it got me 22 meetings. And I went to all these meetings and no one came out and said, oh, you're old. But I saw on their faces when I walked in the room that people were like, oh, you're not 20. And I was so frustrated by that I just decided I was going to write a book and, happy ending. Okay, so more questions for you. Here's a good question from Michael Newman. So you finally get staff on a show and it's for a showrunner who is known to be extremely toxic, or at least a known toxic environment. And it's likely it will be a terrible experience. So one, make it a learning experience and hope to move on to something else. 2, not worth it, keep trying for something else. Or 3, something else altogether. What would be your advice there?
Well, I don't think there's a black and white answer to that. I don't think it's a binary answer. Like for me, I was at Law and Order: Criminal Intent. We thought we were getting picked up for 3 more seasons, and then we got canceled the next day. So and the run ended, and it was like, oh, I got in, and then I suddenly got out, and then it took another year before I got staffed on a show, and the show I got staffed on was Rizzolian Isles, and that was like a notoriously toxic room. I didn't know that at the time. I wish I did, although I think I probably would have taken it. One thing I say to people is when you get into a room, you can kind of tell who the good people are and who the bad people are. Like don't talk a lot at first, listen, watch behavior. They're not looking at you as a staff writer to interrupt a lot. Like I always tell staff writers, the best thing you can do is to give one really good idea in the morning and one really good idea in the afternoon, and the rest of the time observe and learn how the room works. When you kind of see after 3 weeks, people can't really hide their true personality. It comes out. And if you've shown yourself to be a smart, respectful person, the smart, respectful people who are higher up will tend to kind of come up to you and go like, this is fucked up. Just so you know, this is fucked up. This is not how it's supposed to be. And so that start to use that as a mentorship. Start to use that as someone who will kind of put their wing around you a little bit. That's why I say don't go to the first person who's nice to you, because those people tend to be weasels. Those people tend they're not the person who like immediately says, yeah.
The person who walks up the first day and says, you want to know anything, trust me. That's the person you immediately not trust, right?
Exactly.
Here's a related question, which is tips on being being a writer's assistant in the room. Any tips on that person in that position?
Yeah. Well, the writer's assistant, depending on the showrunner, can be the fastest pathway towards getting staffed if you have a somewhat decent showrunner. I mean, this is one thing I love about Roberto is he just keeps using that role. We're always having to find new writer's assistants because he promotes from that position. And the idea is, if you get into that slot, this is an unbelievable opportunity to learn how a room works, to do very good note. Don't try to do the job you want, do the job you have. So write the best, clearest, most focused notes that you can for the room. Capture the essence of the idea. Don't editorialize. Put down what was actually decided and agreed upon. Do it well. Don't interrupt. Don't be what I call a speed bump in the room. Sometimes, you know, when someone interrupts because they want to seem like a superstar and the room is going a certain way and their idea, and they're like, oh, I don't really have an ending to that idea, but I just thought it'd be cool if it happened in a diner. And you're like, okay, man, thanks, but we have to start all over again because we just got derailed.
Right.
Or we start going down a path that, no, that's not what we are going to do. But it's an unbelievable apprenticeship. You have to be aware, though, that some showrunners who are toxic and evil, and I've seen this a lot, will promise a script and will promise this, and keep making promises, and then you're on it for 3 seasons and you never got your script. And that sucks. But
that's another kind of abuse, honestly.
It is. And it's something that, you know, all of this abuse comes from a place of imposter syndrome. Like, abusers tend to be deeply insecure because they know they're idiots and talentless. Every toxic showrunner I've had has always been the stupidest, least talented person in the room, and they know it. And that's why they treat everyone like shit. So the other thing is, keep your eye, don't be about joking around and all that, be about the work, and also look for the most focused and effective writers, and just be slowly, not really in a gross way, but developing relationships with them. Because the good, effective writers who want to help you will help you when they see that you're a good, effective writer's assistant. And they will go to bat for you either on this show, or they will say, you're never going to get the job. They're always lying to you. But I have a friend on this show. Let's work on your sample and let's get you on that show. And it's unbelievable access. Just don't, when you know you're being, or when it feels like you're being lied to, you're being lied to. Believe your gut.
So here's a good question, again from Floyd, which is responding to what you said before about, you know, developing friendships, which this sort of question make me laugh. Friendships are great. What does your agent do for you week to week? And my answer is, you know, nothing. Everything happens through my friends. But
yeah, can
you address that?
I'm the wrong person to address that, because I've never been happy with that relationship. I like I mentioned before, I don't trust other people to get me work. They can get me meetings, but really what I have found on the jobs that I've gotten is I find out who the showrunner is, and then I look through my close circle of friends to see who's worked with that showrunner or who knows that showrunner, and then I have them call the showrunner and say, like, oh, hey, blank, I am going to vouch for Ted. You want, and so by the time you go and you do that before the meeting, so that when you go into the meeting, they go like, man, people like you. I got 4 calls about you. And that sets up for a good meeting. And literally every job that I've gotten has happened because of that, not because of some agent like elbowing someone else out of the way.
TV writers hire other writers. It's not true in features, and features producers and executives hire writers, but in TV, writers hire writers.
Because you're working for writers.
Right.
The showrunner is a writer. So they need to know that the writers underneath them are vetted, and they need to know that they will deliver. And that and it's not just, you can be an amazing writer, but if you're an asshole, that's a problem in the room. So sometimes they don't just ask, well, how are they on the page? Or they ask, how are they in the room? And I get tons of calls like that from people. Well, how are they in the room? And sometimes I'll be like, oh, they're fine. And they're like, great, thanks. That's what I needed to hear. Don't hire that person. Okay, great. Or other times they'll call and go like, how are they? And I'm like, oh my God, they're my first hire if I ever get to run a show. Like that person, she's amazing, or and that's what you're looking for, because they have stacks of, the agents send in 80 scripts. They don't want to read 80 scripts. They're so busy. They're like, can you just tell me 2 people I should hire? That's what they want to know.
I think that reality is going to really change the business, because I think that what happened with the ATA action in the before times proved that shows could staff without agents and easily. So here are sort of 3 related questions I'm going to put together. So it's about, how do you decide what you're going to work on next of your own? How do you pitch what's your experience been pitching your own things? And how do you decide what you're going to do next, what your next pilot sample or project is? So like when you're working on your own stuff, so do you still write specs? Where do you find the time? How do you decide? And then what's your experience pitching them?
You should always be writing something new. Even if it's not going to be something you're going to try to sell, it's just writing your own thing frees you up to approach a scene however you think is the right way to do it, as opposed to writing a scene for a show that has an established language. Like writing a new script allows you to create a new language. So, and that's a muscle that you should be practicing all the time. So how do I choose what I'm going to do? The times that I've sat down to write the thing that I think will sell has turned out to be shit, like garbage, and also really hard to break, and it feels like work. And I find myself going like, you know what? I should probably work on that. But I think what I want to do is empty out the kitty litter and clean the box completely, and then put, I hate the kitty litter. And when I'm finding myself saying, I'd like to work on the kitty litter as opposed to the pilot that I'm working on, that means I'm working on the wrong pilot. But when I'm lying in bed or on a walk or talking to you, and instead of listening to what you're saying, thinking about my script, that's when I know that is the thing that I should be writing, because the script is speaking to you.
Right.
And the idea is speaking to you. Don't worry about will it sell or will it not. It's not going to sell.
It's just practical. Yeah.
It's practice, and it's also something that should be in you that's waiting to get out. I wrote a script about the election of 1828 between John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. No one's going to make that, but everyone who's read it was like, holy shit, this is great. I'm like, yeah, thanks. Like they know, and they're like, and they go like, I never knew the guy who wrote Revenge could write this. I'm like, yeah, well, that's one thing that I write. This is what I write on my own time,
Right.
So and you learn a lot about yourself and about your idea and your writing style and all that. It just don't chase the shiny thing. Chase the thing that's bursting to get out of you, like you're John Hurt in Alien.
I feel that. This is the other 2 related questions. What sort of networking events or styles do you recommend? And a corollary question to that is, have you ever attended a paid writer's retreat, and do you think that is worth it?
No, I've never attended a paid writer's retreat. I have a lot of qualms about that. Maybe there are good ones out there. I have 2 friends that the 3 of us, when we're drunk, say, if we had no morals, we'd get a house in Palm Springs with our credits, and we would just charge people $10,000 a weekend and just show up for 15 minutes and then it'd be like the Fire Festival, but for writing retreats. And everyone would get a cheese sandwich, and we just run, and then we were like, yeah, I'll read, and then read, and I get antsy when people are giving money to other people for retreats. I just do. And the converse of that is, I think it's better to go to things like to WGA mixers and to lectures, like lecture series. I mean, obviously we can't really do that now, but as a co-EP for the, before the pandemic, for 3 years, I just started going to all the diversity mixers, partly because I got tired of showrunners going, I can't find any good diverse writers. And so then I just started going to the diversity writer mixers, where there are either assistants or junior writers who are trying to get ahead. And I'd look around and be like, I'm the only goddamn executive producer here. So, and then I just would like talk to people, and if someone wasn't an asshole, I'd be like, let me read you. And then I'd read them, and then I'd say, you're good, okay, or let's work on this idea. And then I got a bunch of people, showrunner meetings, and I have now just a running folder of people, so that now my friends call me who are showrunners, and they go, oh my God, I need someone good. Who do you got? I'm like, here's 14 people. And they're all, and I vetted them all, and they're all great. So I think those meetings, though, I think those WGA writers will help other writers, like good writers, good people will help other people. That's non-transactional.
Right.
I worry about the other.
Yeah, you have to do it in the spirit of the karmic wheel. It can't be transactional. You have to say, I'm going to be a good person and support other people, and in return, people will come to support me when I need it. Right?
Hopefully, yeah. I'm still waiting for you to support me, but okay.
Oh, please. I practically pay your rent. So, okay. So what is it? Here's another question. What is
You're late on this month, by the way.
Sorry, I'll get that out to you right away. What is it about the entertainment industry that allows for so much falling upward? How this person says, I personally know of mediocre writers who worked on TV flop after flop and still ascend to positions of greater power and privilege. How does that happen?
Because the merging of so many corporations and corporations taking over the entertainment industry means that they run it like they're selling shoes or cars or makeup or whatever. And that's not a good thing. And the corporations operate on one factor. Can I defend the choice that I just made to my boss? And if they say to their boss, well, this show imploded. Well, what has that showrunner done before? Nothing. I gave them their first job. Then that person's fired. But if they can go like, oh, they ran 3 shows at NBC, and they those shows only lasted 2 episodes, and everyone who watched it blew their brains out because they didn't want to live in a world that created that kind of material, then, but it doesn't matter, because they could say someone else hired them, and they go, oh, okay, well, someone else. And then once you're in that little club, the same shitty, hacky writers just get traded around like a utility infielder. They don't get the good shows. They just get the shitty shows that the networks don't care about, but they need someone to sit there in the chair. So it really comes from a place of the corporations and the executives in the corporations being afraid. And they have to be able to say to their boss, I made this decision because someone else made the same decision at another company.
I'll never forget when I first switched over to writing, and I had a fancy producer attached, and I went into the executive and I did my pitch, and she laughed at all the right places and gasped at all the right places. And we all thought I was selling it in the room. And when I was done, she named a writer who was then getting $1 million script. And she said, if he had pitched this, I would have bought that in a second. And I was like, yeah, but I cost so much less. Why wouldn't you hire me if you loved it that much? And she said exactly that, because if he wrote it and it didn't work, then it was an anomaly. But if I hire you and it doesn't work, then I'm the one who took a chance, and it's my head. And it was
I've worked. Yeah,
it's I was glad for the honesty too, right? I mean, I was grateful for that.
I've worked for people, if you look at their IMDb page, you're like, how are these people not run out of this town on a rail? And and by the way, how do they get ahead? There's another factor. It's not just the executive side. the people that stumble forward, the people that fail upwards, they don't care about the product, they care about the deal. So what they do is they book deals 3-4 years into the future, and this town goes, wow, that guy, he's got deals. Everyone's making a deal with him. I should make a deal with him. Now they're in
mentality.
absolutely, and and they're just laying napalm behind them, but they don't care, because by the time the jungle is burning behind them, they're already off into another country, flying their jet, dropping more napalm, but they're so far ahead, it doesn't matter. So I've looked at some of these people that I've worked for and been like, how are you still working? But it's because they're not about the project, they're about the deal. And you can always make a deal. And it's a lot easier to make a deal than a good project.
Oh, absolutely. Here's a question I'm going to answer, because I think it's for me. Does being a published book author, that would be me, not you, Ted, help with you? You could catch up though. Help with being hired as a screenwriter? Does that impress showrunners or executives? I will say from my perspective that it did reinvigorate my career. And I do believe that being a published author really helps, because, and it's sort of what Ted was talking about, this fear mentality. The fact that your idea, your story exists in another format, whether it's a book, a novel, a graphic novel, a newspaper article, whatever it is, somehow reassures that scared executive that, well, this already exists in the world, so there must be merit in it. And so it does really help. Although, it's not something one should take on lightly as a means. And because writing books is not all that easy. So.
Yeah, I was just about to say, your success as a novelist is more the outlier than the norm.
Well, that's correct. I would agree with that. So Gus wants to know, do you still write specs? And if so, where do you find the time?
I write specs. I'm writing one right now while I'm writing the Wright brothers. So I think you should always be writing, and I enjoy writing. So I hate sports. I hate I don't, and also during a pandemic, like what else am I watch movies and I go for walks, I go camping, right. and I write. And I think that I find myself staring out the window and thinking of a story that I'm not getting paid to write, but right. I want to, and then I go like, oh, well, that would be a cool scene. And boy, and then you start writing notes down. And then before you know it, you're in front of a Word document or a final draft, and you're like,
I was on the treadmill this morning and suddenly right. I had my phone out and I was like, I had a whole thing worked out. Like, that's happiness. That's, all right, I want to answer a couple other questions. I want to be respectful of your time. F. Glover asked,
that's a first.
Well,
I know.
I'm trying to be nice for the public. F. Glover, this is a great question. Is there training now either in school or on the job for showrunners? As far as I know, there's really just the Guild training program, right?
Yeah.
Do you know anything beyond this?
What's funny about that? I haven't done it yet. I'm looking forward to doing it. I know a lot of people have gone through it. There are condensed versions that like take place over like a weekend. Then there's the longer extended version. The frustrating thing to me about the showrunner training program is too often showrunners don't do it. And I think for two reasons. One, sometimes if they're just total idiots, they do it out of ego. They won't do it out of ego. I know what I'm doing.
I know everything, yeah.
Then you don't, and you're gonna suck, and you're gonna make everyone's life miserable. But quite frankly, some people don't have the opportunity to do it because you can't get into the program unless your show is going, ready to go. And if your show is ready to go, you can't, that's like saying, I'm gonna learn how to fly, go to flight school after I've taken off. Like once the show starts going, how are you gonna stop and do a 3-month training program? It's insane to me. I think it should be a thing that when you get to co-EP, if you want to apply to it, you should do it because, right. I mean, I've been lucky. I've produced stuff independently. I've had a lot of access to shows by working with showrunners, closely with showrunners on big shows. So I've had a really good kind of mentorship that way, or apprenticeship. But even that doesn't give me the full nuts and bolts of everything. Like in some cases, I worry about what I don't know. What I don't know, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it really frustrates me that the only way to get into the program is if a studio or network gets you into the program after you're getting ready to go and do a show, and you barely have any time to do it.
Yeah,
So
no, I agree. I actually made it past the first round of when I applied.
Nobody likes a braggart.
Well, I know, but I'm saying I didn't make it all the way because my show was in development and not going. And you know, for me, who came out of it from producing, right? And so I knew a lot of that stuff and still did not have the ego that said I don't need to know. I was so eager to know, but I agree with you about that. So we have a number of people who are coming at this question from different places. A playwright, someone who's a psych major, someone who's knows they're interested in TV and is starting out. So can you give like your general best advice for people who are starting out? How do you penetrate? How do you get in?
All right, I'll give you my 3 pieces of advice that I always give.
Okay.
The first thing builds on what I was saying before. I say to writers, write. There's nothing more frustrating to me when someone says, hire me, and I say, okay, well, let me read you. And they go, well, I'm still working on my sample. Then you're not a writer. You should have many scripts ready to go at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, you're not ready, and don't expect me to give you the opportunity, or anyone the opportunity, when you're not ready. Practice, generate material. Like I said, you know, I have Westerns and war dramas and police thrillers, and I can hand them out whenever someone asks for them. Secondly, let people read your work. Don't write a script and put it in a drawer. I was guilty of this. Back when I was an editor, I was at a wedding, and a friend of mine who is a very successful TV writer asked how my writing was going. And I said, oh, good. And then he asked who I'd given my scripts to. And he said, oh, no. And I said, no, I just put them in a drawer. And he said, how's that working out for you? and I was hiding. And he called me on it, and he was right. And I didn't want to know what people thought, because that's terrifying. But look, if you can't take criticism from a friend, you will never make it as a professional writer, because you're constantly being read and judged and noted, and it's soul crushing 98% of the time. So you have to learn how to take a note and then implement the note.
Right.
That's part of the job.
Right.
And it's a hard skill to learn. So practice it now. Mm-hmm. And remember this is the other thing I tell people about taking notes, is the best thing about a good note is it makes your work better. Yeah. So listen to the criticism. Yeah. And the third piece
of take someone's better idea and claim it was mine. So.
Well, yeah, that's exactly.
And your yes, sir.
The third piece of advice is a little. People go, really? And I'm like, yes. It has been very useful to me, and I think it's not highlighted enough. Know your personal story. Create a pitch for yourself that is as clear and focused as your pitch for your pilot or your movie or your play. Because when you're starting out, showrunners and producers and executives will all say the same thing to you across the desk. Tell me about yourself. That's a given. So prepare for it. Don't be caught off in your heels and go, oh my God, what do you want to know? Have a well-crafted, focused 2-minute answer. This is your opportunity to prove you can tell an interesting, funny, and endearing story. Don't squander that chance, because what they're really saying when they say, tell me about yourself, is tell me a story. So be interesting, be unique. It's a plus if you have work experience and life experience outside the entertainment industry. Don't hide that. I was a medical researcher. I lived in a warehouse. I threw illegal raves. As a boy, I grew up in Europe. my mother flew with NASA. All of those things make people sit up and go, wait, what? And then they ask you for more information. Specific details like that will make you stand out. Now,
Here's
it won't.
good
Oh,
question
go ahead.
related to that. Do producers care where a writer got their degree from? Or do they care more about the personal story?
I may be an asshole producer. Like, I mean, everyone told me like, oh, you went to USC, you're part of that USC mafia. I'm like, am I? I never once had someone go like, oh, my fellow filmic writing Trojan. I'm like, fuck that. Like, I if I could go back in time and stop 18-year-old Ted from going to USC in 1989, I would have fucking done that give me a DeLorean. I'm ready to go back. Waste of time.
All right, let me see if I have any more questions from the audience here. Okay. Any specific advice for people trying to break in over 30? I don't know. Just keep writing. Good writing, right? Isn't that?
Keep writing, and you know, it's going to be discouraging, but don't try to just do it by yourself. Network.
Mhm.
It's okay to ask for help. I'm a very proud person. I feel like I'm supposed to do everything by myself. It's that Boston Irish bullshit that I grew up with. But it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask people. People actually like help. I love helping people. Like when someone asks it, as long as they're not doing it in a you must help me. It's like, do you have time to help me? Can you help me? It's like, absolutely. Let me try to help you, because it makes you feel good too.
Mhm.
Don't be afraid of that.
We have two people who would like to know about more specifically about some of the shows you worked on. One attendee is asking about Revenge and sort of the head snapping plot turns, and wanted to know if they were decided on the fly or if that was plotted out over the whole arc of the series. So why don't we start with that?
No, it was not plotted out. Look, I mean, what we had on Revenge was, we knew what episode 13 was, the mid-season. Like, we knew, like, oh, there was going to be something. There was going to be a boat that blew up. There's an arm on the bottom of the ocean with a wedding ring on it. But it was, you know, season 2 was really rough because there was so much pressure on, it's such a big show and you got to deliver, and we didn't have the story engine to keep it going. Sunil Nair came on in season 3 as a showrunner, and we plotted out a lot more that way. But, you know, I said earlier that the network sometimes, you know, the network is the be all end all, even though he was the showrunner. Like in our final season, we knew it was the last season. We went in, we plotted that thing to hell. Like, we figured it all out, wrote 5 episodes, hadn't started shooting yet. And the network went, you know what? We've changed our mind. We don't want to go that direction. We went, what? Oh my God, we just lost 5 months of time. And then we were just putting rails down right in front of the train. And look, it's their prerogative. They're paying for the show. So they can do whatever the fuck they want. But that was like you got to be kidding me. We were so ahead. We were going to let, and then they did another thing, which was, we were chugging along. We got to episode 20. We're like, oh man, we only have 2 more episodes left because we're only doing 22. And they said, oh no, we've changed the order to 23. And you're like, wait, what? On this show? It was like trying to run a marathon. And then they go, no, we changed it to 30 miles. You're like, you can't do that on mile 22. What are you doing to us? And we had plotted everything out, and then we had to like create another episode out of nothing. And you're like, how do you? That was a really rough show to do, because it probably should have been a 12 episode miniseries, but we did 100 episodes.
Wow.
So there's a part of me that was like, we are fucking gods. The very fact that we like. I wanted to say to every actor on that show, like, you know, those giant houses you're living in, I'd like a thank you for that, because we'd all like a thank you for that, because we figured out a way to make that thing run for 4 years.
And what about working on Star Trek? I mean, that's a very weighty thing to go into. Carrie Anderson asked what it was like working on Discovery when you started in the show. you had 10 movies and 5 or 6 series of already produced content. So did you like, what was that like? Did you, I mean, I know you're a nerd, so you probably knew it all already, but
Yeah.
yeah, did you feel a particular weight in taking on that mantle?
Yeah, it was horrible. It was so much pressure because it was also a prequel.
Mhm.
You know, it was taking place between the show Enterprise and the Kirk episode. So it was, you're locked in, like you'd be trying to break a story and then someone would go, oh, you can't do that because in an episode of Enterprise season 3, and I'm like, I don't fucking watch Enterprise. What, you know, or, oh, we'll do this. Oh, you can't do that because in episode 3 of season 4 of Voyager, they did, and you're like, oh, son of a bitch. Can we just tell a story? No, I mean, that was rough. That was rough. That was and it was rough because Star Trek was the reason I became a writer. That
Mhm.
was, I love it was everything that why I wrote. The first things I ever wrote were my own stories of Star Trek, and the first feature film I ever wrote was the script for Star Trek 4 because I'd seen Star Trek 3 and I imagined what would be my Star Trek 4. Like, Spock is back. Now they're flying home. What's it going to be? And so I wrote and then went to go see Star Trek 4 and went, oh, they did whales. Okay, cool. I didn't do whales, but it was really, there was a lot of pressure. It was very frustrating because you were constantly being blocked from telling a story that maybe you knew, like, this could be really good, and you're like, you weren't allowed to go that way because of canon, because there were 50 at that point, 1 year, or I guess 49 at that year, 49 years of canon. That was a very hard job.
Pepper Reed observes that you were writing fan fiction before you were writing for the show, which is hilarious.
Yes.
So these are 2 related questions. Do characters or actors ever dictate your storyline?
Yes.
And yes, okay. We don't have to go into any more depth.
Hey, usually not in season 1, but once you start getting up into season 3, like, you find, oh, they're not working for us, we're working for them. The call is coming from inside the house.
And do you ever feel any pressure coming now to have streamlined casts or storylines because of COVID, because of budgetary?
Yeah.
Is there a little pressure? Are you feeling that?
Yeah, I think it's we shoot in Canada, so weirdly Canada is not doing as well against COVID as America, despite them not having the previous president that we had. But we have adjusted. You know, we don't do things like atmosphere on the set. So atmosphere is when you pump a type of pseudo smoggy smoke thing that just makes light look better on the set, and it creates a greater depth of field, and it just makes the shot look richer. We haven't used that. We have way fewer extras, sometimes no extras at all. We have adjusted stories to just be with our main characters so that it makes the set safer. We have very strict protocols. So yeah, COVID as it should, has affected everything. It's affected the types of stories we tell and how we tell them.
Next question. Is a nautical chart Boston Harbor? That's from our friend Guy.
Oh no, it is. This is where I used to live here in Fairfield Beach, where my family is from, off the Long Island Sound, near Bridgeport, Southport, Fairfield.
Here's a question from Dan Calvisi. He's a writer. He's a man who writes women, and he would like your perspective. That he's worried that he won't be taken seriously as a man writing women's stories. Any advice, experience, thoughts as a man who writes great women? Well, that's because you love women, but I don't know if that will.
Yeah, I think I'll be honest.
Advice that Dan's looking for.
I have a script that I'm very proud of, about women in World War II in England. That's based on a true story that I did 2 years of research and read 45 diaries and just really broke it down. It's all based out of real stuff. I'm really proud of it. I haven't shown it to anyone because I understand that right
Advice
now.
you're giving other people here? What is that about? I mean, right? You're telling your advice
Well,
to people your work, and you put another one in a drawer. Some good.
I did because I don't think that right now it's my place to tell that story. I don't see anyone else telling that story, and maybe in 2 or 3 years, I think it's very important right now that the dial's being turned. Do I think it's fixed? Absolutely not. I hear, frankly, from a lot of white guys my age, some of whom used to be my friends, who are like, it's now it's gone the other way and it's impossible for white guys. It's not impossible for white guys. It's slightly harder than it was before. And it's still not anywhere at the level it is for everyone else. So I'm sorry that you're complaining that it's a little tougher. I'm not writing those stories anymore right now because as much as I do research, I'm doing research about the female experience as opposed to a woman writing about their experience. So I'm really proud of the script. I don't think it's the right time for me to try to do anything with that because it's not necessarily my story to tell. I do think that at some point there will be a different type of conversation about how stories are stories and the human experience is the human experience, but we're not there yet. And we have a long way to go to empower the voices that have been silenced for too long, or that there's been way too many stories of a white guy telling you what you're supposed to feel or what I think you're feeling, as opposed to just saying, hey, what are you feeling?
Right.
So I'm not, my advice is,
why don't you offer it up under a pseudonym? But I think that
but that's lying.
Problem, right? It's lying, and it's the same problem. You're still, even if you slap some woman's name on it, you don't feel it's the moment to.
But then you're being Tootsie. You're being Dustin Hoffman, in Tootsie, and like you're lying to get ahead, and you're also then taking a slot from someone who deserves that slot, from a woman or someone, I would have a real problem doing that. That seems like.
I think it's something that we have to, as writers, I mean, we have to be able to write all characters, right?
Yes.
If you could only write who you are, you would only write white men. I would only write white women. That would be absurd, right? So I think that, but I think you're right. There's a difference between, the kind of research and respect that you can put into creating a character whose experience and is different than your own. And taking agency for telling a particular story, which I think is a different, slightly more, it's just a different task, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's incumbent upon us to write all characters well, to give them depth and humanity, no matter who we're writing. But I also see your point.
Yeah.
So I don't understand that question. How did he know Rizzoli and Isles' experience? Oh, how did you know in advance, I guess, that it was going to be
I didn't. If I knew, I would have paused, but I was so desperate, I probably would have taken it.
Right. And Dan also says you've written several shows with women leads. How did you write them? Well, you did your job. You researched.
Yeah, and also there was someone else who was the head of, like, when the showrunner, and also it was years ago, this conversation wasn't happening.
That's true. All right, we have one last question for you, Ted, and this is coming from Michael Newman, and the question is, are you keeping the hair because it's working for
you? I will not be keeping. I mean, this is absurd. This is just ridiculous. This is literally the longest my hair has ever been in my life. It is just absurd. I feel like I should be in the band Traffic or something like that. Like just at the keyboards, you know, like it's just
Highfield Boys and
yeah, it's I don't know how much longer it's going to go. I'm going to go see Fish, a band that I follow religiously, and I'm going to see 7 shows of theirs in October. Thinking about keeping the hair till the shows are done, and then
Fish hair.
cutting it.
You
Yeah,
know, appropriate.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Ted. As always, I love hanging out with you, and I know that our guest did today too. Thank you for being so candid and informative about your experiences. And thank you all to the attendees. I hope you found this talk useful. We're getting a lot of props in the chat here. Fantastic. I learned a lot. That's great. Wonderful. All of you, remember that we will continue to do these discovery sessions. We have a new lineup coming for fall. We welcome you anytime. I can't promise they'll all be as good as this because Ted's such a rock star. But we'll try to get this. Yeah. All right, you're getting a lot of thank yous. Ted, thank you for the candid answers. Thank you for this great forum. So, all right, I can still be your friend.
Well, and by the way, thanks to everyone who listened and put up with me being a jackass, and also thanks for being out there and doing this. I came into this very late. It's very hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the very fact that you're trying to do this and you were putting yourself out there, and there's nothing that is more emotionally dangerous than sharing your writing with someone, and to then put yourself out there into a world that doesn't necessarily, everyone writes, so they think they know how to write. But just because they wrote an email doesn't mean they know how to write a script. It doesn't stop them from telling you did your script wrong.
Exactly.
So I really respect everyone who showed up and is trying to do this. I applaud you. It is sometimes you will feel like Sisyphus, but
I will also say that, and I've often felt like Sisyphus, but I will also say that when you're actually creating, when it's going well and you're writing well, there is nothing better. I mean, it's such a high, and I feel frequently blessed that I get to tell stories for a living, and I know that you do. And because I also feel that we share this belief that through the power of narrative, we can change the social conversation.
That's true. And I will also end on this one last thought, which I know we spent some time talking about toxic behavior, and I can come off as very cynical or crass. But the truth is, the worst people I've ever met in my life have been from in this industry. But the converse of that is true as well. The best people I've ever met in my life are from this industry. And I am so grateful for that. I am truly grateful for that. And it is the only thing that has kept me putting one foot in front of the other in those toxic rooms, because I'm grateful that those people have come into my life and made my life better, and I hope I've made their lives better. So
in all sincerity, I count you in my make my life better column. So
I wish I could say the same, but
there we go.
No, of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, is our relationship in a nutshell.
Exactly. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, everyone.
All right.